Welcome to House Beautiful Out Loud, the podcast from your favourite homes brand. My name is Julia Goodwin, I'm the editor of House Beautiful, and today I'm with Kris Hopkins, who was elected at the 2010 general election as MP for Keighley in West Yorkshire. He was appointed Minister for Housing at Communities and Local Government Department last October. Good morning, Minister.
Good morning.
You've had 9 months to get your feet under the table. We don't have enough homes for our 63 million citizens, so what are your plans to rectify this?
Well, you're quite right. We don't have enough houses at this moment in time, and demand out there needs to be addressed, needs to be sorted, we need to deliver those houses. And what we're doing at the moment is looking at a whole range of different houses. So whether it's council houses, which we've now delivered twice as many council houses in 4 years than the previous administration did in 13 years. Whether it's affordable houses, 200,000 affordable houses delivered us last week, but plans for another 165,000 in the very near future.
Right.
And overall, we've delivered some 485,000. But we need to grow a business, the capacity to build houses, because that's fundamentally what's lost here. There's no lack of a willingness to buy houses. Mm-hmm. Every builder I know wants to build some houses. Mm-hmm. What there is at the moment is there isn't enough businesses to actually deliver it. There were 12,000 small and medium-sized businesses who were building, and we're down to 3,000 as a consequence of the recession. So we need to build that capacity again.
Right, so that's training, skills,
absolutely,
loans and grants to businesses.
Yeah.
You were talking about actually the successes you've had in building houses, and there's been quite a lot of recent coverage in the press about the Chancellor's initiative to fast-track brownfield sites, and the feeling that from that could come 200,000 new homes by 2020. There's also been quite a lot of controversy, as there always is. An Englishman's home is his castle, let alone a British person. We're speaking for the whole of the UK here. And I think the Town and Country Planning Association, amongst others, has said, yes, hey, but we don't want local councils to lose control of planning developments. There's also been, I think, some criticism about the aesthetics of our housing, which, it sounds a bit of a luxury if you don't have a home and you want one, that we've kind of lost the ability to build good streets. We can build homes, we can put in developments in existing towns or on the outskirts of them. So how do you balance, the needs of existing homeowners to kind of maintain a pleasant environment with the kind of the desire for our squeezed and affordable, our squeezed and valuable families, if you like, to get affordable homes?
Well, I think the point you make around the quality of our housing is really important. I want to see, it doesn't matter whether it's at the bottom end of the market, entry house, it's worth spending time and some resource to make sure we get high quality housing. And I live in Haworth, in beautiful countryside around me, amazing terraced houses and some housing born out of an industrial revolution. And just down the road is the little village of Saltaire, which is a World Heritage Site, which is a very small, today would be sort of boutique type houses. This was housing for the workers of the time, and are much sought after because they were well designed. The streets are well planned out. The resources around, supporting services. There was a hospital, there was a school there was a place of work, there was a place of worship as well. And actually that careful planning is really important. And we need to get, and we've got actually, I visit lots and lots of really amazing developments, well thought out, but it is important to get that quality right.
Absolutely. I mean, and the Victorians had quite a lot right in some ways in terms of, their homes were actually quite warm, quite airy, and quite soundproof compared to some of the modern homes that we're building. Now, I heard you speak at a conference last autumn, and one of the issues was the problem with actually getting land released. Obviously, this initiative to build on brownfield sites is one way around that. But how are you going to persuade? One of the big problems is to find the land. So how are you actually going to persuade developers who really isn't in their interest to let all the land go, to release enough land to help you build more affordable homes? Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there are only 135,000 homes built last year. Yeah. And we're saying we need 200,000 at least, if not 300,000. There have been estimates, I think, that our population will grow over the next 8 years by 3.8 million more people. So there's a big gap there between 135,000 and 3.8 million. But, you know, as the party which supports business, you know, it's in the developer's interest to keep the supply slightly scarce, to keep the prices up. On the other hand, you've got all these people with nowhere to live. How are you balancing those priorities?
Well, you see, I mean, I would first of all challenge the idea that, you know, developers are sat there on thousands of acres of land which are stored, and I think that's rubbish. And the Labour Party have suggested that this is the case. It's all about land banking. That's what's forcing it. It's about a lack of housing.
Yes.
And actually, I've talked about capacity. There is a huge issue about public-owned land, MOD land. There's lots of NHS land out there, and there's a huge amount of local council authority land out there. I know that because I used to be the leader of Bradford Council, and I've got to say that I put my hands up. I didn't build enough houses as a local council leader on our land as well. And yesterday I spoke at a conference which was all about housing associations and councils, and one of the people in the audience from that sector said, you know, councils aren't building enough housing. So we've got to, I think we should just, you know, over the last 6 months I've spoken, in fact over the last 3 months I've spoken to the top 10 builders, chief execs and chairmen of those companies. They are working flat out. They could not build any more houses. Their staff are working at maximum capacity. Every single house that they can produce is being produced. Next year they're hoping to recruit some more people, get that capacity up by about 10%. What we actually need to do, as mentioned earlier on, about looking at you know, how do we, you know, grow that skill base, how do we grow that company base, how do we de-risk some of the entries into the small and medium-sized building. But I think what we should do is, and I think, you know, George Osborne was right, how do we actually, you know, how do we utilise that brownfield site? I think it's worth saying that actually over the last 4 years, the lowest amount of housing on the Greenbelt has been delivered in 25 years. So the idea that we're building on the Greenbelt and we're ruining it is rubbish. We're not doing that. And you've seen now from the Chancellor that he wants to see a maximum utilisation of that. And I go back to Bradford. There is, and if you've got a chance to go to Bradford, I know it's sometimes got a bad reputation, but it is actually a beautiful city. The architecture in there is amazing. But actually, the centre of it, much of you know, the small villages that make up the centre are post-industrial, they are brownfield, they are in rack and ruin and need to be utilised. And actually the local council there, their solution is to go and build on the green fields on the edge, rather than addressing, you know, those hollowed out cities. And I'm sure that's replicated right across the country in our urban space. How do we build on those places? And George is right by pointing to that.
But it is, just speaking on the point of view of builders for a minute, it's much harder actually for them to renovate and refurbish existing buildings. There's all sorts of problems of access and noise and pollution. It's a much harder ask.
But George didn't say, I want you to build on brownfields, and by the way, regardless of the consequences.
No.
He put some money on the table to do that.
Yes.
And we've also put £500 million available to small and medium-sized builders. So there is quite often an issue about capital.
Yes.
You know, it's a loan to them.
Yes.
But they can actually utilise that. They can bid soon for it. And we want them to build next year, and actually, you know, working with local authority land, targeting brownfield land through George's £200 million pot. We can move some of this on.
But aren't you always going to be sort of, you know, have your sort of back against the wall, if you like, if it's costing builders so much more to refurbish existing buildings? This brings me to the point of the rates of VAT that are being charged at the moment on building, that to refurbish a home, the VAT rate is 20%, whereas to do a new build from scratch, it's zero. I mean, House Beautiful is actually part of a campaign to cut the VAT, to make refurbishment more affordable. And there have been estimates that there may be up to 2 million homes could be created. How are you going to level that playing field? I can see from the point of view of the hard-pressed builder, if it's cheaper for him to bulldoze it and start afresh, why wouldn't he, if he's a businessman trying to earn a living?
Well, I mean, it's difficult to generalise about what an individual would do around a land, because there are individual circumstances around an individual plot of land. But I mean, there's two things to this. The first one would be, I've seen the campaign. I know you put a huge amount of energy into it, and it's right that we get challenged about the way we do things, and we're held to account about it. And there may be even merits in what you're saying, but the reality is that I get asked. My political career, whether it's at national level or at local level, get loads of people coming with really good ways of either spending more money or not taxing me in such and such way. The reality is you've got to balance the books at the end of the day. And if we take a tax away here, a tax must appear somewhere else to balance the books. And the good news is, that's George Osborne's job rather than mine.
Although, actually, we won't dwell on this point, but there is an argument that were you to do it, you would stimulate so much more building that you would get the money back in other ways. But anyway, we'll move on from that point. And another point that I actually wanted to raise was the issue of how families are solving the solution of the housing shortage. There are more three-generation families or multi-generation families living together now than at any time since the Victorian era. And by multi-generation, I mean not only parents, children, but also parents with their adult children, 24 to 31-year-old men, I think, particularly are living at home in far greater numbers than ever before. And is there more that we should be doing to encourage builders and developers to think about creating multi-generation homes where several generations can live together? I mean, one aspect of that would be helping people to adapt their homes to make room for multi-generations, which also brings us back to the helping them by cutting the rate of VAT if they were to do extensions. But the other issue would be to think about non-traditional methods of building, such as modular building. Is the government thinking about doing anything to encourage that, so that you could literally add a portion to your home for granny or for the children or for your middle-aged son who suddenly gets divorced and has to come home for 6 months?
Okay. Well, I mean, where I live, I've got a big Kashmiri community, which, say long after many of our families across this country have sort of don't have the same multi-generational occupancy of a house. I mean, people have gone out and left the house and set up their own home. I think that's there's a granny flat tradition around, but actually I know in my community there are lots of families who buy houses. By the way, they're not given to them, or council houses. It's about real. There's a real tradition of going out and sort of buying your own house and then knocking them together and creating that. And so there's lots of that activity going on where individuals are trapped and, perhaps, couldn't get a mortgage. And you're right, young adults staying at home because, those are the fundamental things we need to address. And so I'll come on to modular in a minute, but things like Help to Buy, things like making sure there's enough affordable houses to rent and to buy, actually, under market cost and rent houses. That's really important to do. The Help to Buy scheme in particular has been around making sure, David Cameron recognised the average house, new home buyer, or first-time buyer was 37 years of age, and that can't be right. I bought my house in my early 20s, and that's what we need to get. Yeah,
and I think in London it's 42 if you do it ever at all.
Absolutely. So how do we actually change that? And the key thing about it was, getting down to the fact that you've got to earn a decent wage, and quite often a young couple will come together, so two salaries will come in. A household clearly could pay for the mortgage, but they couldn't secure the deposit. It was too difficult to secure so Help to Buy has addressed some of that. So where people are making a choice about intergenerational living, that's wonderful. But actually, if they're trapped in that situation, we've got mechanisms in place now to be able to move on. But modular, let me just do modular.
Can I just sort of get to Help to Buy before we move off from there? 7,300, I think, people have or mortgages have been given under the Help to Buy scheme, which is great. I think it's 1% or just over 1% of all mortgages. Are you going to continue it after the next election?
Okay, well, the figure's not quite right.
Okay.
35,000 people have now actually secured a house.
Too low then, yeah.
Yeah, and so certainly under the equity scheme, that's a new buy. That's a new build, should I say, for every mortgage as well. The guarantee scheme could be your next house you were going to buy, your move on house sort of thing. But the equity scheme is about new build, and 86% of all those sales are first-time buyers.
Yeah.
So, and I've got to say, actually, 94% are actually outside London as well.
Yes.
So right across the country.
So, in fact, the reason that there's been a housing bubble in London is actually not particularly to do with Help to Buy. But having said that, we saw a survey out just recently by Shelters saying that actually, even with Help to Buy or without, only 18% of families UK-wide can afford to buy their homes, and in fact in the southeast I think the number is 4.3%. It's very, very small, so it is a great scheme. It's helping some people, but arguably not enough.
Well, I said right at the beginning of the interview we need to build more houses, and you're absolutely right. We need to get that right. I know the mayor in London is absolutely committed to delivering affordable housing. I think he's got to deliver another 36,000 before next year. So they're working absolutely flat out to increase that capacity, utilising all the land they've got to be able to make it work. And if you look at places like Ebbsfleet, just on the edge of London, 20,000 new houses, new towns being created to be able to facilitate this. Can I go up to modular? Because I think that's
come to modular, non-traditional ways.
That was the first time we
building.
met last year, wasn't
That's
it?
right, and self-building.
And I just, I talked earlier on about capacity. First of all, I went to visit in my role. I went to Porter Cabin up in York, which is obviously not a brand you'd usually associate with a quality house, but I went to this site and I stood next to a beautiful couple of semi-detached houses, and they were modular build, and I didn't know. I couldn't tell the quality. The quality between traditional build and this was not recognisable. Extremely good finish. I've lived there. That's the key measure for me. At the end of, would I live there? And I would live there. It's a great house, and it took 4.5 days to build.
Yeah.
4.5 days, and they've created a machine. They've designed to extremely high quality, so it's an extremely energy efficient house. Actually relatively cheap to produce, but not a cheap product. I think I just think it's important to say that. And if we're going to address the capacity issue, which I mentioned earlier on, we need brickies, yes, we need electricians, all the rest of it. But actually, if you're going to build through a modular form or self-build, and people make choices around those constructions, you use a different workforce.
You do.
It's a construction industry workforce, and so we can increase that capacity fairly quickly. But what we don't have at the moment is enough companies making enough of these products at the volume we require to address the shortcut.
And of course, the beauty is it's made under factory conditions, so therefore bad weather doesn't stop play. Your brickies can't work at the moment if it's raining or if it's snowing.
Well, what I'd like to do is I'd like to find sizable sites, and there are sizable sites across the country. You've got 500, 600, 700 potential houses. Identify those individual plots. Some of them will be custom built. Individuals will make choices about that. But actually put a factory right in the middle of that site, and actually, rather than having all the transport issues associated with it, and build out across that site with a local workforce, getting that skilled workforce in there, get a partner construction company to build. So we lay out the streets, we lay out the lampposts, the utilities, all the rest of it, and then we literally start producing those quality houses on that site.
So again, we come back to the land, don't we? Because I think Britain's self-build rate is one of the lowest in Europe. I think we're just under 10%, and most of the people who are self-building are actually at the higher end, your German Hofhouses and the like. Whereas there is a whole tranche of people, families, the middle market, if you like, who actually this would be a marvellous solution to them creating spacious and eco-efficient homes. They're very, very, very cheap to heat, and actually they're the ultimate eco-home in a way, because they're endlessly adaptable and you can take them and move them on. So again, I think we're coming back to the land. House Beautiful readers that I've spoken to who want to build their own, the biggest problem is for them to find the land. So
this is what we've done. I mean, first of all, there's a report coming out of local authority land, because I think that's much of the solution to it. There's a huge amount of public land out there, and Elphick and House, to find individuals, are going to come with reports soon and actually give us some idea of some of the changes that we could do to do it. But actually in the budget, the Chancellor said, again, housing industry should like the Chancellor because he's very enthusiastic about the housing sector. And what he said was, there's £150 million. We're going to have 4 vanguard development sites, so identify those plots and build out on that, and a right to build piece of legislation where you can actually make that choices, and we want to encourage local authorities to bid into that pot, and we want to get people self-building, custom building across the country.
Wow, so right to build, when will that be coming in?
Well, we're just going to have consultation on it. So, I mean, in the coming months, it's not about years, it's in the coming months.
So before the 2015 general election?
I would, absolutely, because the money's there at this moment in time. We just need to get the legislation sorted out, and the guidelines have been put together at this moment in time. The bidding process is about to start, and we want to encourage local authorities to identify their land and get people on those sites building houses.
So, House Beautiful listeners, you heard it here. The Housing Minister has said that a right to build piece of legislation will come in, all being well, to make it easier, those of you who are keen to self-build and those of you who would like to go down the modular route. I bring our conversation to an end now. Thank you very much,
My pleasure.
Kris Hopkins, for your insight into the government's plans for housing. I'd love to hear from you all who are listening. Let us know what you think about the Minister's proposals. This is House Beautiful Out Loud signing out. Thank you and goodbye.